Have you just installed your FiTech EFI system and you're trying to get set up and tuning and it just won't run right? Here are some of the things to look in at the very beginning when trying to figure out what was missed when setting up the system. So we got an engine stand here to easily show you all of the things that can go on right away when you're trying to diagnose an engine that's not running properly. The first thing that I would ask is, how is the engine running? I understand it's not running right, but what is it or is it not doing? Is it starting but not idling? Maybe it's surging. Maybe it fires and dies. There's a lot of different ways that an engine can not run correctly, but will help diagnose what's going on. Before we get started on any of this, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more tech videos. And jumping right in, the very first thing that I would always recommend doing is jumping on your handheld and going to the fault code section. If there is something directly missing, like a connector not plugged in all the way, or a signal is immediately not right, the system's gonna tell you, and that is the first thing that you wanna correct. So let's jump into some quick scenarios. I wanna start with the engine just cranks. If the engine's cranking and cranking and cranking, we wanna look at three major things: air, fuel, and spark. One of those is gonna be just completely missing. So we could start with the basics. Air is pretty simple. That's just opening and closing the throttle. Fuel will be from your fuel system. If you don't have a gauge, every time you key on the system, you could use a mirror, key on, and look for fuel squirting into the throttle body. If you don't see a squirt of fuel, you're not getting fuel. And then spark, just the same as a carbureted application or any other vehicle. Pull a plug and see if you got spark while cranking. You should have all three. The most common things that I see with just pure cranking is sometimes messing up the fuel lines. So maybe the feed is onto the return, which would be backwards. You can't feed into the return. You have 100 PSI on the fuel system, but no fuel going into the throttle body or your EFI system in general. I've seen other applications where a LS system was hooked up, but no regulator was put into the system, so fuel was just looping from one rail out back through the other. Another one sounds pretty silly, but I've seen it before too. The terminals on a fuel pump being hooked up backwards. That makes that pump spin backwards, and you're not pumping forward, you're pumping backwards, and that just doesn't work. So that's some quick checks that you can do on just straight pure crank and nothing else. The next one would be a fire and die. Fire and die will tell you that you're getting air, fuel, and spark for a moment, but then the engine's stalling right afterwards. The first thing that I always like to jump in is go on the handheld, go to the dashboard, look at RPM. When you crank the engine, you should be seeing RPM all the way through that crank. If it's showing 0 RPM or flashes a number and then disappears, chances are the system's shutting off when you're trying to start the engine. If you're getting no tach signal at all, no RPMs, then you want to look into the tach signal itself and make sure that's hooked up correctly. So the first one would be check your key power. That wire needs 10 or more volts during cranking. So when you're going underneath the car to a fuse block, find the spot that's generally called ignition, but before hooking up that wire, get a voltmeter, put it on there, crank the engine, make sure the voltage doesn't drop below 10 volts. If it does, find another spot. Sometimes a relay may be used to correct it so you don't get that much voltage drop, but maintaining that voltage keeps the computer on. That second part is the tach signal. Refer back to your instructions to make sure that the tach reading for your ignition system is hooked up in the correct location. With a conventional 3-wire distributor, that tach signal goes to the negative side of the coil. If you have a ready-to-run distributor with a tach output wire, our tach wire goes there. With CDI boxes, they have tach output wires that you would hook the EFI to as well. Now, if you're doing a system with timing control, that tach wire isn't used and you're pulling it from the 2-wire plug off of the distributor. So if you're seeing no RPM when doing timing control, that's directly that line to the distributor. The next one that you may be running into is the engine starts, runs for a little bit, stumbles and dies. That one is going to generally come back to either not enough air, which means a throttle adjustment. So if you could hold the throttle open a little bit and the engine runs fine and stays consistent with RPM, it's probably just a throttle adjustment. Another one, when you put on an EFI system, it's always a good practice to recheck your ignition timing. Make sure the ignition timing is correct for your engine build. Not specifically, I got a stock Chevy 350 and the 1956 instructions for this motor says to have it at 4 degrees. A lot of times you have some aftermarket components and you can get better ignition timing and performance by increasing the timing up to 10 to 12 degrees. I would say in most applications with most V8 engines, around 12 degrees initial is going to be a good benchmark when doing fuel injection. The next thing that you want to look at is what is the engine doing? Let's say it runs, but you're getting surging up and down. The surging up and down is inconsistency from some sort of a reading off the system. The first thing that I would always check is for vacuum leaks. That seems to be the most common. There is 2 vacuum ports that are a 3/8 port on the back of the throttle bodies. If you ever have a backfire, if those aren't zip tied on, they're blowing off. So that's a possibility there. Other things could be underneath the throttle body. You could have vacuum leaks. Another reason for kind of a surging and hunting inconsistent idle is the exhaust. The oxygen sensor goes into the exhaust and is trying to read the presence of oxygen coming out of the cylinder. If you have an exhaust leak anywhere upstream, so the header flange, the collector flange, or down to even about 24 inches after where that sensor is, it could read oxygen and you're misfueling the engine. The misfueling can cause the hunting and other things like poor drivability, poor acceleration, and more. So those are also things that you want to look into when you have a it won't run right. Now let's jump into some scenarios that you may have on the handheld. It gave you a little direction, but you need to have a little bit more help. A big one would be RPM noise under the fault codes, P0335. That is the system saying that the RPM coming into the system isn't accurate. And the problem with that is if the computer thinks the engine's running at 3000 RPM, but the engine's running at 900, you're getting fuel for that 3000 RPM and you're overfueling the engine. And if it's spiking back and forth, which is usually what's going on, it's repeatedly adding that fuel. So the big thing with that one is to always look into your ignition system first. If you are putting on an EFI system on an existing engine, check the simple stuff first. Burnt plug wires. I got an example here from an LS. The boot is completely melted on the side of it. Even the protected sheathing can burn straight through. So it doesn't mean that your plugs are safe under one of those. So check your plug wires, check your plugs, worn cap and rotor, the coil as well is another common one. If the coils you can ohm out to check them to spec. If you don't know what that is, if you can find the part number on the coil, usually you can go to an online vendor and they'll have the spec on there for the primary and secondary ohm resistance, so you can check those as well. The cap and rotor is pretty simple. Pop the cap off, flip it over, make sure it's not burnt, corroded, worn out. I have seen from time to time that the ceramic buttons on the inside have broken. With that said, all your ignition components are looking fine. Some of the exotic stuff that I've seen cause issues is non-resistor spark plugs. Make sure you're using a resistor plug. That resistor's in the spark plug to reduce engine noise. Alternators can cause the noise as well. When it comes to wiring the EFI system, you may be inclined to run the wires down the valley of the engine on one of the banks. In this case, a small block Chevy, I got the alternator on the passenger side. If you had the main power wire ran down the passenger valve cover and the charge wire run the same spot down into the starter, you can have those two wires crosstalk and they'll create some electrical noise. Another good example of that is the power wires that go to electric fans. You could have some AC voltage off of those just like the alternator, which can cause engine noise. So those are a couple of strange things that can cause external noise to the engine and to the EFI system. But generally speaking, if you're getting an RPM noise, it's going to come from the ignition. And then those exotic ones are kind of when you go through the ignition system, everything's fine. You may want to look at how wires are routed to make sure they're not going close to high voltage like CDI boxes, alternators, electric fans, things like that. Now, touching on the oxygen sensor with the running rich and causing inconsistent idle, you can generally look at that one by doing a smoke test on the exhaust. That's by far the best way to check for exhaust leaks. Same with vacuum leaks. If you put a smoke machine into the intake, it's where does the smoke come out? That's where your leak is. But both an exhaust leak and a vacuum leak can also cause rich running, which can be misconstrued as not running right as well. So with that said, if you have other things like these sensors are really sensitive with what type of fuel you use, don't use leaded fuel. If you are using a leaded fuel, you're just gonna plug up the sensor and it's gonna eventually fail. Another one that I get a lot is this connector on the end of the O2 sensor falling onto the headers, even the wiring itself, and melting. That's another thing that you can easily avoid, but will cause poor running as well. Those will generally throw a fault code in the system for that wideband O2 sensor. Another spot that can cause a lot of headache with an engine that just isn't running right is when you snap the throttle, the engine bogs or backfires out the intake. Sometimes that's just a tuning thing, but more times than not, it's a sign that something's wrong in the fuel delivery system. The first thing that I would recommend doing is putting a fuel pressure gauge right at your inlet of the throttle body, and with the engine idling, just snap the throttle. Watch what that pressure does. If that pressure deflects just a little bit, so you're at 58 PSI and it goes to 54 PSI, when the engine's actually under a load, like if you're trying to move the car from a stop sign, that's a lot more load on the motor. That pressure drop's probably going to be more. A big reason why those pressure drops will happen is something like your fuel filters are clogged. Maybe your fuel line that you're using isn't all 100% brand new, so there's corrosion inside of it that is limiting flow. I've seen these rubber lines being used and being kinked, causing flow limitations as well. So those are a few things that can cause loss of fuel pressure. Another big one would be a frame rail mounted fuel pump, an inline pump, not being mounted correctly, so it starts to cavitate. A simple way to tell about that one is you'll hear that pump. If it's not the same constant humming tone and it's going up and down like multiple times, that is it sucking air and then repriming, sucking air and repriming. And that's going to cause a lot of drivability issues as well. So I hope that covers a good amount of quick questions and directions to go when you have certain situations that you're trying to experience. If you need additional help, we definitely have a full list of directions that you can go, whether that is to call us, email us at techmail@FiTechEFI.com. You can even message us or comment us in these videos and we'll reply to you. But a big thing that really helps us help diagnose the issue is knowing exactly what the engine's doing or what it's not doing. And that helps us jump to, these are the things that can be a thing to check first instead of just running through every check. I hope you like this video. Please like the video, ask your questions below it, and we'll be able to answer those for you. We may even throw some of them on our Q&A question video. And please like, subscribe, check out FiTechEFI.com and watch more of our tech videos for more tech assistance and which systems are best for you.